I'm Henry Logan. I am the chair of the ILR Board of Directors and am so pleased to see all of you here. This is a part of our very exciting series on AI. It's also part of the Wonders, but we have been exploring AI from many, many different perspectives. We've heard some lectures. We have a field trip to the Atlas Lab. We have students coming to talk about applying AI to their curriculum. But today, we're going to hear from Dr. Mark Jamison, who is a member of the Warrington School of Business. And I had a wonderful opportunity to chat with him earlier. And we're going to be able to ask the question, who's going to regulate this? How is this going to be managed? We've heard from our current president, it's not going to be regulated, but we know that's not the way it really works. So, Dr. Jamison, welcome. Thank you for being a part of this exciting series, and thank you for being a part of ILR.
So thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to be here. As she said, I'm Mark Jamison. I direct the Public Utility Research Center, which one of your former residents, Gene Brigham, was actually the very first director of PERC, helped to get it started. He and Bob Lanzalotti back in 1971, 1972, something like that. They got it all launched. So I'm the third director of the center. And you may wonder a little bit, why is someone talking that has a utility center talking about artificial intelligence? And a lot of people wonder about that, except that artificial intelligence is showing up pretty much everywhere. One of the slides I'll have shows that around the world, this is kind of the common number. Somewhere between 75 to 80% of the businesses in the world that answer surveys anyway are already applying artificial intelligence. And I like to ask this question because I talk about AI in front of several groups. How many of you use artificial intelligence? Okay, quite a few. Now, how many of you use a smartphone? Okay, you're using AI. If you're using a smartphone, you use a computer, you're using AI. They're just not telling you about it. But I noticed over half of you raised your hand the first time. I taught a class about a week and a half ago for a government agency in Tallahassee and asked them that question. About a fourth of them raised their hands. So I said, okay, we got a long ways to go, folks. By the time we were done, they were excited they were going to do something in AI. So hopefully that all works out for them. I like this particular topic. Lynn Holt suggested it. I said, okay, that sounds really interesting. Who will control AI? And how many of you were researchers in your career? Okay, so that's not a real good hypothesis, is it? That would be pretty tough. It's a real good discussion topic, but good luck coming up with a clear answer for it. So I'll spend the first few minutes just talking about this particular question. Yeah, how do we actually think about it? What do we mean by control? How do we think about that? What is this system? For those of you that read the newspapers, you may have noticed we had some economists get Nobel Prizes. I think they were announced today, right? And they were all in the space of innovation. And this wasn't necessarily, their topic in innovation. They were talking about when something gets created, what goes away. That's called creative destruction. But one of the things that's really interesting about innovation is it always surprises us. If it weren't a surprise, it wouldn't be an innovation, right? So in terms of how do you control surprises, you're probably not going to. But it still makes for a good thing for us to try and work through and talk about. I'll also, just to get us all on the same footing, talk a little bit about what is artificial intelligence, but that might get a little redundant with things that you're already doing. How many of you have started taking the classes that they have here on AI? Okay, a few of you have, so I'll probably skip a little few of the slides that I have on that. It may be more detailed than it's worth. And then we'll spend time trying to figure out, we've got governments around the world who would like to be in this role of controlling AI. And there are three different models that we'll talk about. One is where the government tries to say, here is what AI will be, here is what it will do. That's the Chinese model. And then there's another model, our friends in Europe, that we're going to put up the rails to kind of direct AI where we want it to be and do the kinds of things we'd like for it to do within boundaries. That's the European model, although I'm a little concerned my friends in Europe seem to be moving closer to the Chinese model. That'll show up just a little bit. And then we have the US model, which for the most part is fairly open, and that's been fairly consistent across the administrations. Biden administration wanted a little bit more control than does the Trump administration, but the US has been pretty much an open approach. So we'll talk about those too and how those are playing out. So let me begin. Can we really control AI? I define it as a rapidly evolving complex of mathematical algorithms that are trained on data to make predictions. Now, the first time I came up with that definition, I asked Google's AI, is that a good definition? It said, yeah, that's a really good one. And today I just wanted to double check, so I asked it again. It said, no. It's way too simplistic. And that's one of the things that is showing up in AI these days. We're using a lot of what we call neural networks, and we've designed the computers to look like, in some sense, the human brain, at least physiologically. And in doing that, we've lost control exactly how AI makes decisions. It kind of makes up how it's going to make decisions. And we don't really know exactly what's going on inside the computer, and that scares some folks. In fact, a gentleman from MIT who had been on leave to work with Google for a while, when these we call these large language models generally, when that model did something it had not been trained to do, he said, that terrified me, and he quit. He went back to the university. So yeah, Google, there's just some randomness in how it will answer the question. But that's how I think about it. It's really complicated. So if it's something really complex, it's a little hard to control. There are a lot of different players making different decisions, so that makes it a little hard to control. We have a lot of mechanisms in play. We have laws, we have politics, we have business decisions, companies' policies, what the different users decide. A lot of people making decisions. That makes things a little hard to control. Then we have the geographic competition. People primarily tee it up as China versus the US, although Europe released a comprehensive plan for artificial intelligence earlier this year, and they said they want to be the world leader. So we kind of have some geopolitics involved. The implications of all this, it's like any innovation. It's an evolutionary process. And if you've ever studied evolution, you know that nobody gets to control it. It's going to go different directions by its different mechanisms. And I saw a really interesting paper earlier this year by physicists, and they were describing the evolution in the cosmos, all the physical matter that we have. They said this is an evolutionary process too. So evolution is now kind of everywhere you go. It shows up in economics, which is my background, but other places too. But AI is directed by this evolutionary process, and it has these different components to it. One is we have a lot of variation. Lots of different artificial intelligence models are out there, and there are new ones being developed all the time. 2024, I've got the number in the slide someplace. 150 or so different models were developed in 2024. I may be wrong on that number. I'll come across it later. But then you need a system that says, well, if you're going to have all these variations, which of them actually work and are sustainable? And that's a small percentage. A few of them just don't make it at all. And then there are those that actually last long enough to be built upon, and that's an even smaller number yet. But if you're going to have an evolutionary system, a system that rather than being static is going to change over time, you need something that says, here's what success means. And then you need transference. You need something that passes information from one generation to the next. And that's that building upon that I was just talking about. And then generally also in an evolutionary system, you need motion. You need things that go from one place to another. And AI tends to have all of these things. And that's kind of what this process looks like. And it tells us something about where this all goes. Because we have lots of different areas of variation, things that create AI in different ways. And we have it in science. These are the people with mathematics, physics, engineering, all trying to do something better than someone else, or just do something new and interesting, depending upon where you are. Academics, we're just excited about being interested in something. Some people want to accomplish something, to build a particular product or something. But that's all the experiments in science. We have them in business as well, people trying to create different products. I don't remember, I've not seen a number for artificial intelligence, but in general, something like 90% of our businesses actually fail. And it's just because, okay, it was a really interesting idea, but it just didn't make it. But that's part of our experiments in business. Our products, our processes, the economics of it, our business strategies, lots of different opinions on those, and then experiments in government, the different laws that we try, the politics of how this goes. That is where all of our variations come from. And that's one of the things that makes thinking about AI's evolution really complicated, because you have not just the business aspect and the science aspect, and the science and business can work together pretty easily. When you throw in political evolution, and our political systems do evolve, that gets even more complicated. Then how do we actually decide what's going to be sustained, what gets transferred, how do things get from one place to another? We have different systems for choosing what's going to endure, what can be built upon, and who makes those choices. Is it the innovators? Is it the businesses, the funders, the governments, the users? Or is it some system that brings in all of their different opinions together? My son moved out to Silicon Valley in January. He's a material scientist, and he's working for a tech startup out there. And he just loves the innovative culture. He loves all the different things that people are trying. I went out to visit him, and one of the first things, now he's always been a scientist. Since he was 4 years old, he used to worry about black holes and gravity. He said, "Dad, this gravity is really a problem." And now he's talking about venture capitalists. He thinks they're a problem too. But that's a whole different focus for him. It's kind of interesting just to see, he now sees this whole system that makes progress possible. So that's how I think about the question. It's really hard to answer, but it's really a good way to stop and think about things. So I want to talk just a little bit about what do I mean by artificial intelligence. Basically, it's machines doing prediction. And the reason it has become so important lately, at least important as in terms of being talked about a lot, is two reasons. One is that the cost of computing has dropped precipitously over the past decade and a half. And we're using machines. And once something becomes really, really cheap to use, we start using it a lot. And that's part of why AI is now so popular, is because it's just cheap to use. And then another thing that has made it really popular is an innovation of about 2017, I think it was. It was a research paper coming out of Google. And that's an interesting thing, is when you look at the significant research papers in the US anyway, they're pretty much been written by industry, not as much in academia as they were. So anyway, this is a paper written by Google, and the title was, "All You Need Is Attention." Because people had struggled since the 1950s on how do we get artificial intelligence to understand human language? And back when I was in college, my roommate was a computer science major. He went to work on his master's degree to a different university to work on that question. How do we get a computer to understand language? And we struggled with it until this group of engineers said, well, what if we just had the computer pay attention to how often words are used and how often one set of words tend to follow a different set of words or precede another set of words. So what if we just paid attention to the attention? And that's what worked. That's what made the large language models, ChatGPT, et cetera, all possible. And that's another thing that made this great. So, but all of our decisions involve predictions, everything. Everything. I got in my car to come here. I was predicting that my car would run and get to here. Where you decide to live is a prediction about, I think I'll like this or maybe I won't. Or what I'm going to read. It's a prediction about, will this content be interesting? We're just in a situation now where using a machine for prediction is a lot cheaper than trying to do the predictions ourselves. Sometimes they're actually better predictors, sometimes they're not. Depends on how you define better. But that's where AI is and where it is going. So since we've dropped the cost to prediction a lot, that changes when we have a machine do the predicting and how it gets used. Now I want to just have a couple of slides on where is the prediction used and then how's the prediction done. And then we'll get into these different ways of perhaps governing it. We have basically three ways that we use the predictions. One is that we just have the computer report the prediction. So there's a water utility in Tucson, Arizona, and it had lots of water leaks. Any of you have ever been around water utilities, bursting pipes, rusting out pipes, a real problem, and it's always a surprise. They said, well, about a decade ago, they said, you know, we got this thing called AI. Maybe we could use it to predict when pipes will burst. And it worked quite well. It helped them control their budgets. They were actually able to stop some pipe breaks before they would actually happen. That's what they did. But all the computer did is give them probabilities that, you know, this sometime in the next year, right over here, under these conditions, that pipe's probably going to break. And that let them do their planning accordingly. Then we have these things called generative AI. And this is where the computer is creating something we've not seen before. It's not the same as creativity for humans, at least in my opinion. Now, there are some people very prominent in working in artificial intelligence that don't think humans are creative at all. They think we're kind of like computers. I disagree, but that's just my opinion. I can't prove it one way or the other. But generative AI is where it creates images, it creates text, it creates computer codes that you've not seen before. So it is using prediction, but it's creating something new with that prediction. And then lastly, we have these things called agentic AI. This is where a lot of the work is being done these days, and that is having the artificial intelligence do something for you. So Tesla's self-driving cars, that's what it is. It is the car serving as an agent, doing things for you and learning from it as well. Sometimes we design these to learn, sometimes we don't. But that's what we're seeing here, travel AI. If you want to use that application, it will actually go out and negotiate hotel rates for you and make travel plans for you and book all those things. It can do all of that. And that is having an agent do something for you. So that's kind of where we tend to use AI for and its predictions. But how does it actually go about this? Well, artificial intelligence is a huge field. It started with, it was first called artificial intelligence in 1956. And it was a conference at Dartmouth. They were going to have something on computers, and you've probably heard of a gentleman named Alan Turing before. He had written this paper a few years earlier. It's like, can a machine really think? And people wanted to talk about that. And one of the papers was labeled Artificial Intelligence. And that became the title for the whole workshop, and that's where the word came from. And we've had a lot of things then in that space that we call artificial intelligence, but it was in the more recent years that we came up with this thing that we call machine learning. And machine learning is where we give the machine a lot of data and we say, figure out how to do a better prediction with this data. And almost all artificial intelligence now is machine learning. Almost all of it. Very little is not that anymore. Underneath that is this kind of what we call the deep learning. And that's where we've designed the computer to look physiologically in some sense like our brains. A lot of neurons connecting with a lot of other neurons. And information flows through it. And then it makes different types of connections to eventually get good at something. And that is what the deep learning is. That gives us all these large language models. It gives us all these, there's generators, AI. So that's kind of the hierarchy. Most of the activity these days is down in that lower part. That's what's got people really excited. But that is where also hallucinations happen. And it's interesting. AI doesn't lie to us. It just doesn't know what it's talking about. Because largely, they're predicting words. So I'll show you this in a moment here. So that's a little bit more on machine learning. You will hear people talk about these types of learning that machine learning does. One is called supervised learning. And I compare that to when you were a child and your teacher said, okay, let's go outside and we're going to see what birds eat. And so, okay, they said that, well, there's birds, and those are trees, and those are rocks, and those are seeds, and those are bugs. And which ones are the birds eating? Well, they're eating the seeds, they're eating the bugs. Okay, so with supervised learning, that's what we've done. We've told the computer what things are, and then the computer figures out how they relate to each other. Then we also have unsupervised learning. And that's where your teacher said, go outside and just tell me what you see. Just tell me what's out there. Tell me what you observe. And that's what we do with computers as well. We throw a lot of data at them and say, look for something. And they can do it. And they'll find patterns without knowing what the data actually represent. And then we have reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is we give the computer a goal and it tries to accomplish it. And the better it gets at accomplishing that task, the more rewards we give to it. I've always wondered, what does a computer consider to be a reward? Maybe a little extra jolt of electricity, but I don't think so. Yeah, I don't know. But for some reason, they feel rewarded. And this is the Tesla self-driving car. And that's so it is reinforcement learning, where Tesla said running into a tree is a bad thing. Staying on the road is a good thing. And the car tries different things until it gets it right. I'm going to skip the deep learning, how that works. This is the slide I wanted to go to just a moment ago. You will have also in these models, these deep learning models, what they call reasoning. Now, I'm not very good with differential equations. But I found out that ChatGPT does really well with differential equations. So I was asking it, I said, I want to model an innovation, how it spreads throughout an economy, and it did it. It worked out the equation, it was beautiful. So I thought that was pretty impressive. Well, Apple said not so fast. They took some of these models and asked them complicated questions, and the models got the answer right. And Apple said, how did you find the answer? And the explanation that the model gave was correct. And then Apple said, I don't know if I should believe this model. So they actually looked under the hood and said, what did the model actually do? And they found out that the model didn't really work out that differential equation. It just guessed a lot about what words I wanted to see. and then gave me those words. So they don't really reason. They imitate reasoning by looking up, in this case, academic papers that have the reasoning in them and quoting them back. So like I told you, my son is a material scientist in Silicon Valley, and he's working on materials to kind of recreate how we do insulin pumps. Insulin pumps, if you're diabetic or you have a friend that's diabetic, you know insulin pumps are expensive. And he and his friends think they have an idea that could drop the cost precipitously. But it takes new materials. So he has the job of creating and testing the materials, and testing a material takes like 20 hours. And he said, God, this takes me a long time. So he asked a large language model, said, is there a way to speed this up? And it said, yeah, if you looked over in the astrophysics literature, people that study the stars have figured out how to do this much faster. Here's the formulas they use. Here's the site to the book that contains the answer. And here's computer code that you could use to do the same thing. And it was right. They got it right. He didn't look under the hood, but it was just guessing that it was right. But it saved him tremendous amounts of time. So this large reasoning is really useful, but it's not really reasoning. It's simply quoting back to us things that is seen somewhere in academic literature, maybe by some of the papers that some of you have done. All right, agentic AI, I've talked about that. We give it goals and it goes for it. All right, so now let's talk about these attempts to control artificial intelligence. There are basically three approaches that people are using. One is kind of directed evolution. You can't avoid evolution. If you're going to make changes, there's going to be a surprise. So just the question is, how will the evolution work? And China wants to direct how it will work. Europe, as I said before, is using kind of a guided evolution. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the US largely is open with a few preferences along the way. So here's how China thinks about it. China has decided that it will be a world leader, the world leader, in artificial intelligence in 4.5 years, 2030. That's its target. How's it doing this? Well, it is spreading artificial intelligence throughout the economy, throughout the government, throughout the military. And it's the Chinese Communist Party that's calling the shots. It is saying, here's where AI is going to be used. It is also trying to take control of the AI supply chain. Some people call it the AI stack. That goes all the way from the computer chips, largely NVIDIA's work. Huawei in China's trying to catch up. But what are the chips? What is the equipment the chips will be with? How will we actually train the computers? Where do we need the data centers? How will they be used? What's the software that runs that? What are the different models for doing the artificial intelligence? What are the applications? That's the whole stack. That's the whole supply chain. China openly says, we want to be in control of all of that. And they're prioritizing industry applications. They've targeted 3 or 4 industries. This is where AI needs to grow first. So they've chosen that. Healthcare is one of them. When we get to Europe, that'll be kind of an interesting thing there as well. They want to create the talent. So they're investing a lot in training people, in artificial intelligence. They want to achieve technological self-reliance. They don't want to have to rely upon the United States, and neither does Europe. And so Europe also says we want to be digitally sovereign, and that's what China thinks as well. They want to be sovereign too. And then they want to embed AI in their national surveillance. China tends to watch everything that goes on in the country to the extent it can. In what people are allowed to say and not say, it monitors that as well, and their social governance. They want to use artificial intelligence throughout all of that. That's their basic strategy. And like I said, the shots are being called pretty much by the Chinese Communist Party. They're setting the priorities. They're saying who's going to do what. They're taking control. That's their strategy. This is Europe's strategy. Europe's goal is also digital sovereignty, and I didn't get this slide updated when I came across their comprehensive AI plan. It was released a few months ago. I just hadn't seen it yet. But they also say that they want to be a world leader. Now, I say, please forgive Google's misspelling. If you look over here, that is not how we spell sovereignty. I asked Google, I said, look, here's what Europe is doing. Draw me a picture of it. And it misspelled a lot of words for several times through. I could never get it to correct the word sovereignty. And one of the things that's interesting is when these computers develop these images, they don't know that they're putting words on there. I will tell it, change this word, and it won't do it because it doesn't know where the word is. It is simply plotting bits. That's all it's really doing. It's pretty fascinating how that all tends to work. But Europe has a lot of layers of regulations. It has the GDPR that was made the news a lot a few years ago. Basically, that is kind of knowledge control. What are you allowed to know? What are people allowed to know about you? What can be stored as far as information is about you? It has what's also called the Digital Markets Act, DMA. That is basically to control the big tech companies. They want to do business in Europe. Their business strategies have to be approved by Europe. And that was a fight between the European Union and Apple recently. That the European Union said that if you have an AI system in your product, you have to have portals where other people can connect into it and use it as they would like to. And Apple said, no way. And EU said, if you're going to do business here, you have to do it. And Apple said, well, if that's the case, we will not deploy those forms of artificial intelligence in Europe. Really made the Europeans angry, but that was what they were doing. So that is pretty much a regulation of US companies and one Chinese company. They have a Digital Services Act. That is control of all the small tech companies, not quite as tight a control as they do for the big ones. They have a Data Act. A Data Act says that if you have a product in Europe that collects data, you have to give that to your users and you have to give it to your competitors as well. That is just now going into effect. One of the other things it does, it tries to set up not data centers, I shouldn't use that term. They try to set up systems where everybody is to store their data. They don't mandate that, but they highly encourage it so that they have entities who are in charge of all the data that's being collected in Europe. Then they have an AI Act, an Artificial Intelligence Act. And it essentially says some AI applications are a little risky. And if you're going to use AI, for example, in medical, you have to have our permission. We have to look at it. And they have restrictions on what you can do. And this is going to give them some challenges because in their new AI strategy, they prioritize medical applications. But on the other hand, in their AI Act, they restrict medical applications. So they'll have to work that out, how they do it. So the AI Act is largely trying to put restrictions on risky applications of artificial intelligence. And then you have the US strategy, largely open markets, not quite, but again, the goal is leadership, not with a particular deadline. Europeans don't have a deadline either. Only China has a particular deadline. Means, well, it's having the businesses and the researchers decide upon the innovations. Have the funders, the workforce, and the users decide what they're going to support. Then the businesses and the researchers are the ones that transfer knowledge amongst themselves, and the business and the government working together to modernize the infrastructure, largely the electricity grid, so that we can train all these AI models, and to have a manufacturing base so that we can manufacture more of the AI hardware, computer chips here in the US. Taiwan tends to be the most reliable place for building those, and that causes a lot of people concerned. The Taiwanese are concerned, we're concerned, China's concerned, all about the manufacturer, but the Taiwanese do a really good job. So that's a little tough to overcome, but that's basically the U.S. strategy. So let's see how these play out. I'm going to look at this first from a kind of geographic competition amongst the regions. And I'll show you a lot of data from different research projects that have been done, but here are kind of the conclusions. When it comes to AI research, China is putting out a lot of AI publications. They do a lot in that space. The US, though, leads in terms of the quality of the research. So if you look at which research articles tend to get cited and used, they tend to be mostly American. If you look at who publishes the most, it tends to be China. It's also interesting that in the US, the research is largely industry-led, as I talked about earlier. If you go back a decade ago, that wouldn't have been the case. But now it is. Yeah, it's largely Google, Meta, et cetera, doing the research. Innovation. China has now passed us in securing patents on artificial intelligence. I don't have information on where the patents are issued. My guess is these are patents in China, not necessarily patents in the US. As far as I can tell anyway, that's what it looks like to me. They get a lot of patents. US, not quite so much. We're pretty far behind in terms of numbers of patents, but in terms of output quality, in terms of the models that people actually use, the research that people actually use, the US is in the lead there. And it is industry-led as well, just like the research. Public funding. China doesn't tell us what it does in funding. We know they do a lot of funding of different things. They say that, but they don't give us actual numbers. So I have nothing on those types of numbers. Europe is rising in terms of public funding of artificial intelligence, but it's largely the UK that is doing that. Although of the gentlemen that received the Nobel Prize in Economics on Innovation, one of them teaches part-time in the UK, part-time in France. He helped write France's AI strategy about a year or so ago, so maybe France will start picking up. I don't know what the strategy says, though. U.S. public funding tends to be largely defense-oriented, far and away defense-oriented. And this maps to like the data centers. You've come across the information that all this training in artificial intelligence is being done at the data centers. If you look at where data centers are in the US, they're largely clustered around Washington, D.C. There are a lot of other places too, but that's the biggest concentration by far. And if you try to look up who owns them, the information is not available. So we know who it is. Europe tends to be more public service oriented in their public funding. Business development, lots and lots of AI oriented companies being created, a lot, very fast. US is far ahead in that. The UK and China tend to be kind of head to head. All right, so let me skip through just the details on that information. Publications, as you can see, China is in this group, raw publications. They've surged ahead. We're down here someplace. So, if you look up the specific numbers on China, that is true that this is largely China up here. Oops, I did the wrong thing. There we go. But when you get to highly cited publications, the US is pretty far in the lead and growing. So the quality of our research output is pretty high. China is number 2. You add up Europe. Europe all sum total will be higher than China, but not by a whole lot. By organization, Google, Microsoft, Meta, NVIDIA. So those are all the US companies doing that. These are the Chinese universities. Oh, I left out Microsoft. These are the Chinese universities. So a lot of the publications are coming out of Chinese academies and universities. But when you look at the authorship, there's a lot of industry collaboration in that academic research. The only university that shows up in this time span is Carnegie Mellon. If you, I don't have it here, but if you stretch the time frame back, then Berkeley, MIT also show up. All right, geographic competition. So I talked about this a little bit ago. So here's China in terms of patents. You can see how fast they have grown in that. We've actually, as far as percentage of patents, we've fallen off the pace there. But when you look at notable artificial intelligence models, then largely the United States. China here, then it drops off pretty fast from there. And this is, of course, very variable by year. We did 40 models in 2024. I thought we had maybe a total of about 100 in 2024, so I was off on that. But if you go back to 2021, it was well over 100 that we were producing. And by sector, the industry is leading the way. Government, academia have really, really fallen off, especially in the past, 3 years. This is all post-COVID here. The industry really, really picked up. And I think it's because we learned a lot about these neural networks, and the industry believes it can make money off of it. And so they're really jumping in. By organization, Google, OpenAI, this is led by Sam Altman. Sam is one of these people who does not think people are creative. His AI can do anything a person can do. He may be right, I just don't think so. We have Google, OpenAI, Apple, Meta, NVIDIA, Anthropic. These are all US companies. Alibaba, Chinese, ByteDance, you can see where they're all coming from. Pretty much being led by the US, pretty much being led by industry. Oops, I hit the wrong button again. There we go. Notable AI models by organization. This is a longer time frame, and you can still see it's basically the same companies still in the lead. All right, public funding. Again, we have no data from China, but public funding of artificial intelligence, looking at grants, it's been escalating consistently over the years, slowed down maybe just a little bit in 2023 in terms of growth, but pretty consistent growth. The US dropped off a little bit post-COVID in grants about artificial intelligence. Europe is starting to catch up a little bit, but the emphases are different. The United Kingdom, if you're just looking at the European countries, the UK leads the way, Spain and Germany, France down beneath that. For the US, 75% of it's the Department of Defense, using a lot of AI in defense. Then it drops off way down here. The next highest is Veterans Affairs at 7%, Treasury, etc. And that's been consistent for a very long time. This is in Europe. It is the general public services leading the way. It's about 13 or 12% education. Then they drop off. Defense is clear down here, less than 1%. All right, business development. Lots of AI-related companies, especially post-COVID. They really exploded. And that's just because we now spend a lot of time online, and we do a lot with artificial intelligence for that. It's largely, in terms of funding for the AI companies, the US leads the way by far. 1,000 new companies in 2024 getting funded. The UK's next with a little over 100. China had about 100 as well. I told you earlier, my son in Silicon Valley, all the venture capital firms out there, and he confirmed, yeah, if you're not doing software, they're probably not going to spend a lot of time talking with you. And that's kind of the nature of the beast. But there's a lot of money right now. The venture capitalists are sitting on a lot of cash. The private equity people are sitting on a lot of cash. And so we have a lot to spend. Globally, AI by geographic region. This is just the amount of money we're talking about. That's $109 billion in 2024. The rest of the world drops off pretty fast. If you look at venture capital markets, the US has by far the best developed venture capital market. Europe is really trying to figure out how to catch up. And part of the problem, though, is if you look at our venture capitalists, they're all people who made a lot of money starting companies. And unless you have an economy that starts a lot of companies and has some become incredibly successful, it's really hard to have a large venture capital market. That's just not Europe at this point. All right, economic impacts. This is largely forecasts as to where AI is going. People are pretty optimistic about it. At least the investors are. It's interesting where the private investment is going. It's going largely into how we build the AI and build its infrastructure, our data management. All the top two up here are all about the artificial intelligence itself, and then it's medicine and healthcare. So when China says we're going to emphasize medicine, when Europe says we're going to emphasize medicine and healthcare, everybody's agreeing on that. That's where we can use a lot of artificial intelligence, and you can kind of see where that then goes. By organizations, this is in using artificial intelligence. Like I said earlier, about 75 to 80% of all businesses, organizations are using some artificial intelligence. Interesting study out of MIT back in August, I think it came out, maybe July, where they looked at businesses using artificial intelligence. They concluded that 90% of all AI attempts fail. That's pretty typical. But they also found that most of the failures are where you've had the AI try to play the role of a person in relationships. So I don't know what your experiences are. I recently had a bad experience with Marriott, and it's artificial intelligence on the phone trying to make a reservation. I said, I want to speak with a person. It said, I understand you do, but you should talk with me instead. All right. So after doing that 2 or 3 times, I sent a message to Marriott, and its AI replied and said, our AI is wonderful. So, okay, well, don't have AI do those kinds of things. It's really good in back office operations. Things that are boring, that are drudgery, it does amazingly well. But in human relationships, not so much. All right. And if you look at where people are using artificial intelligence in business, this to the left is cost reduction. To the right is growing revenues. Most of the work is in cost reduction. How can we do something more efficient? That's pretty much true. When we started with the computer revolution a long time ago, it was largely in trying to save money. It was only later that it really created new ways of making money in businesses. But you can see sales and marketing, that's where they're trying to actually be revenue enhancing, creating new products. It was really interesting. I saw a study earlier this year, or late last year. The amount of time that it takes to develop an artificial intelligence model has dropped from about, I want to say 6 months to about 6 days, just in the past 2 to 3 years. So we can create products and businesses really fast, and we fail fast, but that's how we learn. So you can see that most of this is in the cost savings. Okay, regulation of AI. This, I think, is a fascinating graph, and I knew about this pattern but this graph is rather stark. So this tells us here are people who are nervous about AI. Here are people that are excited about AI. The US is almost the most fearful and almost the least excited, but we're still leading the way. That's just, and so that's us. We're way over here. And if you look at this dividing line, about 50%, most of these countries are developing countries. The Western countries are all over here. And that's been a pattern for many years now. I can't say exactly how many, but the Western economies tend to be more fearful of AI than the developing countries. They look at it as an opportunity to do something. I teach a lot of people from around the world that work in governments, that work in utility regulation and telecoms regulation. The very first time I spoke with them about AI, they were worried about it taking their jobs. But every time thereafter, the past 3 years or so, they've been saying, what can we do with this? We want to do something with this. And so they're much more excited than a lot of my colleagues in the Western economies. All right, so number of AI-related legislation passed into law by all U.S. states, 131 in 2024. This has really escalated. I have a group of students working on this. They are trying to do a taxonomy of all of the artificial intelligence legislation considered in the U.S. earlier this year, the 2025 legislative sessions for the states. Over 1,000 pieces of legislation were considered. 131, well, yeah, probably something around that 130 actually passed. Most of them were studies. Not a lot of them actually regulated artificial intelligence. The most significant state regulation of artificial intelligence was California. That was just 2 weeks ago. They passed a bill regulating what we call frontier models, which are just the basic models that try to do the neural networks. And most of it is let people know what you're doing. That's what most of the legislation was about. It didn't really try to control what they were doing. It was mostly saying, just let people know what you're doing. New York and Illinois will probably pass very similar bills this year. So you can look and see state level bills. We've had 9 in Florida that have passed over the past 9 years or so. Only zeros are kind of in the Midwest and Rhode Island, Montana. California has most of them. Of course they do. Yeah. All right. So I thought this was really interesting. This report by the Association of German Banks made caught a lot of headlines when it came out. It came out earlier this year. I've forgotten exactly when. So they looked at Europe's regulation of artificial intelligence. You remember I told you they've got a stack of bills all the way from GDPR down to the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act, the Data Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act. And the banks said, well, we have become a pioneer in regulating AI, but the rest of the world have become leaders in development of profitable applications. So the bankers aren't very happy. And that's started to show up in Brussels as well. They're starting to notice that they've got some contradictions in their legislation. Like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the Artificial Intelligence Act, the AI Act, it says medical applications are really, really, really risky. So you have to be really careful. But then when you look at their new AI strategy, it says we need to do a lot more in medical applications. They've got to work that through. They also want to become a world leader in training AI models. They've got a lot of money to go into it, but they have legislation that restricts data use. You can't have it both ways. At least no one has figured that out. Maybe they'll figure that out, but it's pretty hard to do. All right, bottom lines. China will succeed if the Chinese Communist Party is able to predict the future. That's what you've got to do. If you're going to control the future, you've got to be able to predict what it will do, or at least keep all other futures from emerging. It's kind of what you got to do. So I'm not real optimistic. They will have some successes because they're putting a lot of money into things. They're training a lot of really smart people. But the restrictions on varieties, remember, evolution requires variation. Evolution requires surprises. Evolution requires systems that say this is the right application. And in saying this is the right application, it generates enough money that you can then build the next application. That's not their priority. Their priority is the political system. So it's probably not going to go quite as well for them. European Union is indeed leading in regulation, but it has to be able to predict benefits and costs very well in order to regulate well. I've spent most of my career in the space of utility regulation. Regulation was very complicated, but easy to do in some sense because industries were very stable. They're not stable anymore. AI is anything but stable. So this will be hard. But I think unless they start going this direction, I think Europe will eventually have better success than China does. U.S. will be successful as long as our businesses, our funders, and our users keep innovating faster than people can imagine. And they get to choose the next steps. But we elect politicians that protect us. And they can protect us only if they can predict the future. And they can't really do that well. I teach a lot of people around the world. And everywhere you go, people complain about their politicians. And I explain to them, we all vote for them. So look at yourself in the mirror if you don't like what they do, because that's how we get them. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. Glad to talk about anything you'd like.
Questions? You want to take one mic to one side and I'll take it to the other because we're going to have lots of questions.
Oh, okay. Control of technologies had a checkered past, controlled by the government. I've been in broadcasting for 40 years, starting with radio, Federal Radio Commission, the FCC, content control as well as technologically control. And then as you move more into the internet, it isn't so much the technology as content. What do you think about government control of technology?
The government has been a very good customer of technology. It has been a very good supporter of basic research for technology. But in terms of saying, here are the technologies that should be used, I have not found many success stories in that. So for example, I debate people in different forums, and I'll have people say, well, the government created the internet. I said, no, the government was a customer that said, I want something like that. And the industries developed it, and the academics.
Thank you for your talk today. I'm interested in one thing. I keep hearing that the electrical needs, because of AI, have really skyrocketed. Is that true, and what are you hearing?
Okay, well, that's very easy to hear. It's still in the projection. We are seeing some rapid growth in some areas. How much of it actually materializes may be another matter, because we're talking about like a 30% escalation in the use of electricity. Whether we get there or not is another matter. A lot of it will depend upon on two things. One is, how far do we go with agentic AI? That is really what is going, is the AI doing things for you. You just kind of tell it what you want and it tells you, although now with, is it Apple that came out with this? I've forgotten who. Someone just in the past week is the AI will tell you, here's what I think that you're interested in today. And it'll give you information on it. So they're now starting to anticipate. But that's a lot of electricity used to train it for that. The other thing is if we come up with technologies that make that more efficiently done. And we're working on that. Nobody's real optimistic yet. So we do see some of the big tech companies actually building their own electric generators just because they want it, they want the power. Some utilities are a little skeptical. The regulators of utilities are a little skeptical. So we do see some of them building their own.
Okay, two things. One, that the computer does get feedback, particularly in ChatGPT and Copilot. You can signify by clicking this thumbs up, which I was trying to wave at you before. If you click a thumbs down for a bad response, I'm likely to see a pop-up window asking for feedback. What did I do wrong? Or what did chat do wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And secondly, when I sometimes in my chat, I'll say, you made a mistake with this. It'll say, yes, I did make a mistake. You're good that you caught it. I'm sorry, that's on me. It does apologize.
Very polite. Yes. So every time I tried to correct the spelling of sovereignty, Google apologized profusely. I'm so sorry. I'll fix that. And then it did not. But yeah, ChatGPT does learn. It pays attention to you. Some of the others don't. And that's a deliberate choice. So if you want to create kind of a whole new stream of thought, you really have to work hard with chat to create a whole new stream of thought. But if you're using Gemini or Claude or someone like that, they forget history pretty easily.
So I'm concerned about the externalities here. One is that while AI is just a device, but people use devices for nefarious purposes.
Mhm.
Mr. Zuckerberg and his social media had positive ideas, but people are using social media for scams, frauds, to injure other people, create all kinds of disruption.
Yeah.
They will also use AI that way. Now, Europe is trying to control that.
Mhm.
China is trying to control it. For us, it's freewheeling. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
The other externalities are environmental impacts.
Mhm.
You mentioned that some of these data centers are building their own generators. And what are they burning? I mean, what's the energy source for the generators? Is that an increased pollution, increased noise pollution? People are talking about, yeah, but they make a lot of noise. Water use. Data centers use water for cooling purposes. They're building one in Phoenix, in a desert. Arizona has terrible water issues. I mean, this free-for-all that the U.S. creates has a lot of negative impacts. That's my concern. I think we do need more control at the governmental level. But this government that we have now is exacerbating the problems by actually diminishing our energy supply.
Okay, fair enough.
So that's my,
Yeah.
and as I mentioned to you before you lectured, some analysts are saying there is so much debt being created in the construction of the data centers that they will never be able to repay the debt. And this will create a financial bubble.
Yeah. Yeah, I know nothing about the debt. I can't talk about that. With respect to concerns about how AI is used, it's always true. As soon as you drop the cost of doing something, people use it for good and they use it for ill. I came across a study done by the FBI a little over 100 years ago, talking about how the creation and expansion of automobiles increased bank robberies and increased bootlegging. Yep, certainly, absolutely. Yeah, and so the difference between the U.S. approach, at least so far with that, and the European approach is that Europe says, if you use AI here, you might have problems, so we're going to control that application. The U.S. says, I don't care how you create a problem. If you created a problem, you've got a problem. And that's a difference in the two approaches. And there are ups and downs of both of them. For Europe, it's really hard for them to innovate. The regulations are very costly. For us, we'll probably have some pain along the way. That will certainly be true. With respect to energy and water, there's a company in around, I think, West Palm Beach called Bright Night that actually is building solar and wind for data centers. Now, most of their clients are actually utilities, but they are actually building for these, what they call the hyperscalers. And it's interesting. I met the CEO, talked to him, bright guy. They use artificial intelligence to design the system and then to run it. And so somebody says, hey, I'm building this huge data center here. I need power for it. They will use their artificial intelligence to say, okay, here's how much solar we can use. Here's how much wind we can use. They will sometimes also build a gas plant to back it up, but it's only to supplement. And then they smooth everything out by using batteries. And they're able to do it economically. One of the very few groups that can do that yet. The AI manages all that as well. What some of the data centers are doing with respect to water is they're closing the system and just reusing the water all the time. Israel pioneered this decades ago because they now grow wonderful plants where there used to be desert. They learned about recycling water, and that's what some of the centers are now doing. Is they're saying, okay, yeah, we don't want to just take out water and dump it back into the system. We actually want to keep it recycled. They're getting more conscientious about that. How do they cool it? I don't know exactly. My guess is they probably run it underground to cool it, but I don't know. I actually don't know. Yes.
Relative to power, these data centers are talking about gigawatts.
Yes.
Okay. You'd have to build half of Florida with solar panels to get those kind of numbers.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. But I don't know, I can't say that, well, okay, Bright Knight has not built a plant in Florida. They've talked to some of the utilities about doing it, but they haven't done it yet. But they are putting them in other places, though. Yeah, solar can't generate everything. So you have like Amazon actually they tried to get a nuclear power plant turned back on. That didn't quite go so well for them, but that was because of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They are looking into the small nuclear reactors. Yeah, could be.
Are there any questions are there any questions?
Yeah, there's one online there on the bottom.
Where would Israel fall in your graph about AI?
Fear versus excitement. They didn't show up in the survey, so I don't know. But in terms of innovation, Israel's really productive. If they were a larger country, they would really be significantly noticed. It's just that they're really, really small. But if you want to look at where innovations are happening, Israel is an amazing place for creativity.
I wanted to ask if everyone else has done a question about the different models of funding. As a longtime academic, I know that one of the things that we talked about, the places in which we failed, the things we tried that didn't work. And that's why you went to conferences, because you learned things that work and things that didn't work. But what I'm wondering about is, with all the publications coming down from industry, their goal is not to share their failures. Do you think that's going to alter the speed with which we move forward if we can't share the things that don't work?
I don't know. I don't have data on it. My estimation is that that's probably not a problem, at least at this point, because people are changing companies very fast. A lot of people are dropping out of major companies to create something and then getting bought back by another company. So there's a lot of churn. Again, Silicon Valley, my son ran into a guy he went to undergrads with here at the UF. And this guy is now, what would that make him, 35 years old? He's on his third startup company. You churn through these companies, so the knowledge flows pretty freely so far.
You say that there's a lot of churn in the industry, and of course you mentioned a little while ago that it's a very unstable system right now. How do you suppose that this system will stabilize itself, or will it stabilize itself?
That's a really good question. And if I use the word stabilize, I probably meant it in terms of the technology becomes kind of like, a general computer or an engine, something that's kind of very standardized. We're a long ways from that. I don't know when we would get there. That's really hard to say, because people do worry about what we call the economies of scale. That is taking these really, really large data centers. But you worry about those kinds of things only once a product has become standardized. So you all are young enough to remember when personal computers were first being created. And there were, a dozen or so different companies trying to create there was probably more than that, trying to create personal computers. Once we all agreed upon this is the kind of computer we want, mostly the IBM PC, then only a few companies could do it, one of which was not IBM. It was somebody else, because that's when the scale economies matter. Once you've got a standardized product, we're still a long ways away from that with artificial intelligence.
More questions? Thank you so much. This
Oh,
has
my pleasure.
been
Okay.
fantastic.